What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. I know people have been waiting for this one, and I've been doing my push-ups all week getting ready for the backlash. You know what we gotta do first? Get a couple business things out of the way. I'll be at TFCon next weekend in Artist Alley. Come by, say what's up, shake hands. And let me tell you something. When I grew up, you gave a pound, alright? I don't shake hands unless you're my lawyer or my real estate agent. There's a little bit more passion in this. Give me some love. You can even go in for the half hug. 2 pats on the back, no more. As for this week's videos, I gotta make a comment on one comment I received on the Iron Lucifer video, and that is somebody said, it sounds like you really want to like this figure, but you just can't. You're spot on. Well put. Tonight, actually, as you're watching, this is my Halloween party. I have it annually every year. I'm looking forward to it. In the comments below, it's a tradition now. I'd like for you to take a guess as to what my costume is going to be. As for t-shirts, I got a couple 3X's left, so hit me up if you need one, and when they're gone, they're gone. I'm not going to say I'll never do it again, but it's a huge pain logistically, so it's something I'm turned off to right now doing again. But never say never, in the great words of the prophet Justin Bieber. People have been hitting me up, when is the Challenger review coming? When is the Skids review coming? The answer to all of this is obviously 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Let's get going. Beast Wars. I have huge issues with this within the franchise. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons, my main issue with it, but first we're going to start off with a brief history. Beast Wars came from G2 being a failure. Why was G2 a failure? In my opinion, because it was confusing to the audience and it didn't have the media behind it to push it as a marketing piece of merchandise. I remember being a kid and walking into the store and seeing G2 Transformers and I was like, why are they painted weird? I don't get it. I passed on all of it as a kid because I was like, this is dumb. They got the colors wrong. Is anybody? James and Deco, what's going on with the colors, Matt? It didn't make any sense. Not to me, as a young kid. And with the franchise dwindling, we saw Beast Wars hit. This is in '96. Also, keep in mind, around the same time, Hasbro had got Kenner underneath their flag, which raises a question to me that I hadn't really considered. And that is, with Kenner having the rights to Batman, superpowers, all that kind of stuff, how did Mattel end up with it? God, I wish Hasbro would have got it now. Imagine a DC Legends series. Good night to what could have been. Now, Beast Wars was produced by a company called Mainframe Entertainment, I believe. They were out of Canada, and they had success with a series called Reboot. They went on to do something else after Beast Wars, but who cares? Their claim to fame was their CGI animation, which was beginning to be the buzz at the time, and now looks like PlayStation 1 graphics. But for the time, it was truly pushing the envelope. There's some pros and cons that are correlated to that, and we'll get there. Originally, the show was intended to take place on modern-day Earth. That was in comic book material that supplemented the franchise before it came out. By the time the writers got a hold of it, they changed that entirely, and they were actually, I think, 300 years in the future, came to Earth through a time warp, basically, which put them in prehistoric times. Because we see cavemen at a certain point, and we'll get to that. They arrive on Earth. It's an energon-rich environment. They take on organic forms to protect themselves and shield themselves from the energon, which at that level is dangerous, I suppose, at some point. But the energon supposedly would overload their systems at that level, so they had to have it for protection, which I think is dumb for a number of reasons, but I'm going to hold off on that as well. Because I have one thing to double back on, and that is the fact that this was written by Canadians. Now, there's a slew of jokes I could go into right now, and I'd feel quite comfortable doing it because, as we all know, Canadians are the most polite people on Earth, and they would probably message me regardless of how offended they were and say, really well executed joke, buddy. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to talk about Letterkenny, which is a show about Canadians that has some of the best wordplay I've ever seen in any media anywhere. Back to business. My point in bringing up the Canadian thing is this. They had a lot of control, written for Western sensibilities. I think that's a big part of why this show is received so well in hindsight, because the story is relatively strong, but I think it's because it's written to our sensibilities, and I think it was kind of a fiction-first approach. Obviously, they had to abide by confines to sell the toys and had to add in characters and get rid of characters in order to do so, but I really think the writers put the fiction first, and I think they cared about the story they were telling. Now, let's talk about this prehistoric bit and one of my issues with this straight away. If they're taking on the life forms of the prehistoric animals, why are we getting rhinoceroses, wasps, and tigers, and cheetahs? And I'm sure there will be people that will say, well, there were in Ice Age times rhinoceroses and cheetahs, and look, they didn't look like that. You know they didn't look like that. I know they didn't look like that. They didn't look like that. The reason why they look like that is because they were intended to take place on modern day Earth. They tried to shoehorn that into the story element of it, but it just doesn't work for me. I also think taking on organic life in general is dumb, but that's not what I'm going to get to right here. Because my beef with Beast Wars isn't really about the show itself. Even though I'm going to talk about some of my issues with the show, my beef is about the implications that the show creates for the franchise. But to those people that would talk to me about all the prehistoric animals that I'm not knowledgeable about, and you win, prehistoric master of all beasts. Can you show me where the Fusors were? Because I'm no expert, but I've been to a museum, Mac. I've never seen one in the little cages, like the little glass boxes where they put the... Never seen one. They got like a wolf with wings hanging off of it. Never seen that. Where's that? Experts. And it's awfully convenient that the guy that takes on the Rhino mode is happened to be named Rhinox, and the guy that takes on the Wasp mode happens to be named Waspinator. Optimus Primal. Nailed it, Mom and Dad. Couldn't have been more appropriate of a name. Which once again is obviously a writing shoehorn to make it work. I am expressing that maybe it doesn't.
And I know that they took the names after they took their forms, but that doesn't work for the joke, now does it?
Anyway, when the show drops, I remember the general reaction being negative. I remember people talking about it in the school hallways and saying like how dumb it was, that it didn't look like Optimus Prime, etc. There was a disconnect. There definitely was a disconnect in the beginning. We all have to acknowledge that. Now the disconnect has greatly dissipated. We have to acknowledge that as well, but we also have to ask why. And I'm here to tell you that I think the answer is... G1! Yes, I think G1 is still responsible for saving what is this show in regards to the franchise as a whole. It wasn't until we started seeing Starscream that people started giving a We move on into season 2, we get Megatron, we get Optimus, we get Russian Ravage, who turns into a wolf-head robot, my friend. Which is dumb, but it made people care. And it made people care because people care about G1. Do people care about Beast Wars? Absolutely. But why? Because it is beloved. And why? Because it wasn't always. Because of its connection to G1. Because of its connection to the thing that we know that already works. Be clear, the G1 elements were not always in the plan. It was a reaction to the negative criticisms, reviews, and backlash from the fans. That's why we got the G1 element. That's documented. They did that to try to capture you. To some of you, it worked, and that's fine. But that's why it was done. It wasn't initially intended to be so. It was an afterthought, it was a shoehorn, and it was a ploy to get people involved. To make people care. This becomes a big deal later on, but let's continue. Season 2, we get plenty more retcons from writing issues in Season 1, but you also get more character development to include Beast Wars characters kissing, which is fine. I'm good with that. We get Season 3, which gets a little bit off the rails, but somehow is able to get tied up, and it's tied up well, for the most part. Why? Because Simon Furman was brought in to steer the ship, to get it back on track, to finish strong. And who is Simon Furman? One of the G1 godfathers, who not only helped with the Marvel stuff back in the day, he helped in the IDW stuff later on, and his presence is felt amongst that brand for most of its duration. Later on we get Transmetals that nobody really likes, even though I think the premise is more interesting. I don't think it's great either, but I think that Megatron controlling Cybertron is an interesting premise. I also think that like the spiritual element of transformation is kind of interesting, but that's another topic maybe for another day. Then we get Beast Wars 2, we get Beast Wars Neo, none of which really count in my opinion, but look cool and have some really cool character designs, unlike, we'll get there. So that's kind of my brief history of it in a nutshell. Obviously the good guys win, the bad guys lose, so on and so on. But let's talk about the pros and cons, because I'm not really here to tear apart the show. I think the show is kind of inherently good in and of itself. My problem with the show is how it relates to the larger pie. Pros. It's well written. There's some mature themes in it, including suicide, sacrifice, love, and so on. It's written for Western sensibilities, which, as a Westerner, is going to obviously appeal to me more than something that's not, generally speaking. Shout out to everybody that's like, I only watch French films. What are you doing here? You're on the wrong channel. The CGI pushed boundaries in animation and cleared the way and paved the road for future shows and pretty much the state of animation that we're in now. There's some cons that come along with that as well, limited character cast, etc. But a pro that comes with the limited character cast is that because it's such a limited amount of characters, you have more time to develop those characters more fully, which they did, and they did fairly well across the board. With few exceptions, obviously, nobody wins them all, but a fair amount of the characters, they're really given the opportunity to breathe, develop, and art. Unlike, I can't believe that movie has an 89% score. Simple. But the characters are really given a chance to show different sides. We see flawed characters. We see flaws in Megatron. We see flaws in Primal. We see flaws in Cheetor, which often can be important. There's a con that comes with that too, but I'll get there. We see characters defect. Arachnia, Dinobot. That obviously is a complicated character element to present in a children's show. We see a spiritual element with Rhinox, which I always think is interesting, and I love it when IDW has introduced a lot of that spirituality into this very mechanical life form. There's a paradox there that I'm just attracted to, and have been for quite some time. We see lore develop that has kind of become part of the fabric of Transformers, such as protoforms and sparks, which we've seen the franchise take and manipulate and build upon to make interesting things. And then in the toys, we see the ball joints and stuff like that, but this isn't really about the toys. And lastly, is save the brand. It 100% saved the brand. I think they could have saved it by other means that don't have the cons that we're about to get into, but it did save the brand. And to remind you of the climate at the time, I want to point out what this show was competing with. Two of the most beloved, adored, long-lasting animated series of all time, especially post the 80s Reagan era. And that is Batman the Animated Series, which is arguably perfect, and the X-Men, which is arguably perfect. So for that brand to come out after the failure of G2 with a totally new idea and try to revitalize it and be successful in that regard, you gotta tip your hat to that. However, it came at a price. We gotta get our cards on the table for the cons. Some of these are subjective, some of these are objective, just like the pros. But I know a lot of people in today's day have a hard time dealing with that. They don't understand how opinions and feelings can be different than their own. And as a result, they get activated, triggered, and angry. And they need to find a catalyst in which to take it out. And oftentimes, I have been that catalyst. And I can be what you need me to be. If you have hard times wrestling with your emotions and you need some sort of figurehead to point a stick at or beat with a mallet, I can be that for you. I'm strong enough. And I care enough about you. Back to business. The developers of this series, Bob Forward and Larry DiTilio, I think is his name, didn't know anything about Transformers. They were unknowledgeable, they were ignorant, and they didn't care. And it showed. Much in the same way that it showed years later with this lad. And in case you don't believe me, let's have a listen.
I'll be honest, when Larry and I started out, we did not know a whole lot about the Transformers universe. I think I wrote the pilot without really knowing anything.
So let's not try to argue that. I think the designs are dumb. I don't think they look cool. I don't think they look interesting. And I don't think they look much like Transformers, to be honest with you. They lack that menacing, intimidating look. We all know the G1 animation could be better by today's standard. But given other shows that were comparable at the time, they look cool. There's a reason why Optimus Prime looks the way he does in the movie. Obviously, it's different. But the inspirations remain true to the G1 because it just looks cool. There's something striking about it. These characters don't look cool. To me. Obviously, it's subjective. But it was hard for me to make that buy-in to characters that I thought looked goofy and said goofy big bot, ba-doop, doop-a-doop. So, the CGI pushed boundaries. As a result, it had limited characters because of how much money it took to create those characters, and it took away part of the charm that was there from G1 from the beginning, which was an abundance of characters that made the world seem bigger than you could possibly imagine. This world seems very small by comparison, and it lacks that je ne sais quoi that made G1 so special. We see this more and more with more CGI animation down the road. We don't get the lavish world-building plots and themes that we used to get with Batman the Animated Series, the X-Men, Justice League Unlimited, He-Man, Thundercats, G.I. Joe, and Transformers. While the characters were more enriched, more full, there's also two negative things about that. A lot of them are less meaningful. You can make the argument that Optimus Primal is far more complicated than Optimus Prime, but he just doesn't mean as much. You know why? Because sometimes it's better to have a character that stands for something and means something over a character that's more complicated. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be a balance. I 100% agree there should be. But there's something about being a young boy and having role models and archetypes to look to with a strong moral compass that never falter. They take on father-type characteristics for young children. And that ends up meaning far more than any ball joint or paint application or fiction. What the character represents and stands for ends up becoming larger than who the character is. Case in point, the iconic, meaningful element of Optimus Prime is still very much a part of our consciousness, and I'm going to prove it by interviewing a number of people, neighbors, co-workers, friends, family members, etc. I'm going to provide you the audio to prove my point that Optimus Primal will just never be as iconic and will never mean as much to the American consciousness, it's the only country I can speak of because it's the only one I know, as Optimus Prime. Because that character had a clear moral compass with strong morals, values, and ethics that created a patriarchal type figure for us all to look up to and strive to be like, not unlike this alien. And as a result, will always mean more. Now, let me provide you these interviews with random people who aren't really into this thing of ours and see how they see it.
Scotty.
Yes.
Now, we are co-workers, correct?
We are indeed.
And you wouldn't consider yourself an expert in pop culture or nerddom or anything like that?
No, not at all.
Okay. Who is the character in picture 1?
I don't know.
And who is in picture 2?
I mean, picture 1's like a bad guy. Picture 2 might be like Optimus Prime or one of them guys.
Uh-huh. How do you know what Optimus Prime looks like?
I don't fully, but I thought he was a truck, and it may have been being a kid or the more recent movies.
Fair enough. Cass,
Yes.
you are my sister, correct?
Yes.
How old are you for the record?
30.
Without reading the text in picture 1, can you tell me who that character is?
No.
Looking at picture 2, can you tell me who that character is?
Optimus Prime.
How do you know that that's what Optimus Prime looks like?
I've seen him lots of times. That's Optimus Prime. That's what he always looks like.
I agree. Em, you are my sister-in-law, correct?
Yes.
And you're significantly younger than me, correct?
Less than a decade. So,
Okay,
sure.
fair enough. I'll take it. Can you tell me who the character is in picture 1?
I cannot.
Can you tell me who the character is in picture 2?
He looks like those are Optimus Prime colors, but I don't think that is Optimus Prime.
So you would have guessed correctly, but you have no clue who the first person is.
No.
Now, you're not necessarily an expert in things of the pop culture necessarily, but would you say that you know more than the average person?
Not in the Transformer world.
Correct, but generally, like you know who Ra's al Ghul is.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you for your time.
Am I on a podcast right now?
Hey.
You are a former supervisor of mine, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you tell me who is in picture 1?
I can't remember his name.
Can you tell me who's in picture 2?
No, but it's a tractor trailer.
Okay. Do you know what franchise he's part of?
The Transformers.
Correct. You are one of my dearest friends. Been friends.
I appreciate that.
Been friends for over a decade. I need to ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
What is the name of the character in picture 1?
Oh man, I don't know.
Okay,
I know
that's fine.
too.
What's the name of the character in picture 2?
Optimus Prime.
And how do you know that that's Optimus Prime?
Because I couldn't answer that. It's just clear as day. It's Optimus Prime.
That's the perfect answer.
I would imagine the first one's probably some kind of bastardization of Optimus Prime too.
Exactly. Now, you and I have been friends for almost 20 years.
Yep.
Let me ask you a few questions about those pictures I sent you.
All right, you want me to look at them while you answer me?
You can. What is the name of the character in picture 1?
Yeah, I'm driving.
Be careful.
That's the bad guy. What's his name? Megatron or something like that?
Okay, and what's the name of the character in picture 2?
He's a good guy. Optimus Prime?
You're 100% correct about the second one, and you're helping to prove my point on the first one. You are my father, correct?
Yes.
And I am your greatest achievement. Don't answer that. We'll just go with yes. Who is the character in picture 1?
I'm not sure I know.
Who is the character in picture 2?
It's the main character in Transformers that's been around forever. The leader of the good guys.
That's correct. That's correct. I'll accept that.
No, Optimus Prime. That is who the red truck is. Yes.
Yes. You have helped prove my point.
I have.
Yes.
Who is the other guy?
So continuing, there was also confusion caused by this series and the brand. It's Megatron, but it's not Megatron. It's Primal, not Prime. But there's still Optimus, and it's Ravage, but it is still Ravage. But that's Megatron, and it's not Megatron. And it just confuses the brand. It confuses the identity of the brand. More so with the Predacons and the Maximals versus the Autobots and the Decepticons. So we're going to dig back into that in a bit. There was also dumb characters. Waspinator, Cheetor, just goofy, dumb characters. G1 had that as well, but not to this extent. Like in the Jar Jar realm of things, you see a lot more of that in Beast Wars. Even with all their characters, that most of which are far more complex than any G1 character, which I've already admitted. And I think the whole organic life is dumb. Dumb. Stupid dumb, Mac. But all of this brings me to my big complaint and my big issue with Beast Wars. These are all feelings and kind of some are subjective and some are objective, but sort of an overview of how I see it. But this is my personal issue with it all. It changed the fabric of Transformers. It changed the DNA of Transformers, as my buddy Snowflake said. Changing it from Autobots and Decepticons. Changing it from mechanical things versus organic beasts. Changing the cast of the core characters themselves, which are obviously Optimus, Bumblebee, Grimlock arguably, Megatron, Starscream, Soundwave arguably. Changing those characters into different characters. And what I mean is replacing the roles they play with totally different characters lessens what the franchise means and has built. And all of this led to making it okay to change the fabric of Transformers. Let me explain what I mean. Because of Beast Wars, we get Armada, Energon. Because of Beast Wars, we get the movies. And I know what you're saying, but the movies are largely based on G1, and you're right. However, they also make huge changes to the fabric of Transformers, huge changes to the Bible of Transformers, so to speak. And when I say Bible, I mean what was set kind of as the standard and precedent with G1 as to what this brand is, what it's about, and what it means. And once they changed it, it made it okay and palatable to a general audience to accept that change. Can you imagine if they put out a Batman show, but it wasn't Batman, it was Batmanly, and he resided over Baltimore City, and he fought the Funster? It changes the fabric. You can't change what means the most, which is why this show got successful when it tied back to what made it a success as a franchise in the first place. It's why Prime is still seen with loving eyes. It's why Transformers Animated is still seen with loving eyes. It's why the War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron games are well received. It's why Transformers Devastation, which is dog shit, a trash game, is still well received. It's why IDW is so cherished, because it stays true to the themes, concepts, archetypes, fabric, DNA, and Bible of what Transformers is and will be. And it's not that Beast Wars is inherently bad. It's good. It's a good show. It's that Beast Wars made it okay for Transformers to not be Transformers anymore, to be something else. And once that was set in stone and then accepted by the public, anybody could kind of have their way with it. And that is my issue. The franchise suffered an identity attack by what Beast Wars made other people feel comfortable in doing. And it lessens the worth of the brand. Beast Wars is a great show about transforming robots, and a bad Transformer show. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.